Jeanette and Jennifer and Julie. God, lots of people are already here, so that's fantastic. So welcome, everyone. This is the first time I'm trying the live format with Dr. Doug Lisle. I'm so happy he's here. So before we get started, I know you're here by your comments, but I'm not seeing the number go up. So somebody just type in on the screen that you can see us and hear us, okay? Hi, Tina. Pretty sure you're there, even though the number's not changing. I'm just going to wait a second because there's no sense. There you are. Okay, perfect. So welcome everybody to this wonderful live broadcast with none other than one of my favorite people in the whole world, Dr. Doug Lisle. Many of you are already familiar with him, but if you're not, he is the co-author of The Pleasure Trap. If you haven't read it, you must check that book out. He's the psychologist at both the McDougall 10-day program and the True North Health Center, both located in Santa Rosa, California. And what some of you don't know, and I didn't know until recently, is he has a wonderful weekly podcast called Beat Your Genes. You can listen live every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time and even call in and ask questions, or you can listen to the archived episodes on Blog Talk Radio or iTunes, and I believe there's over 80 now. Thanks, Anne, for telling us you can see us and hear us. Before we get started, Dr. Lisle, I made you a present. I know you're not going to be able to taste this, but what these are, okay, so let me explain. You have created quite a stir with your new lecture about the cram circuit. So what these are, I call these Cram Muffins, because I feel if people are going to cram anyway, they may as well cram with carrot cake. And if they're going to cram with carrot cake, which is your favorite, it may as well be healthy. So these have no sugar, no flour. They don't even have dates. They basically are Cram Muffins, C-R-A-M, which stands for carrot, raisin, apple, and millet. I was going to put pineapple in, but then I would have had to call them crap muffins, and I didn't want to do that. So next time we're together, you're going to taste these. And speaking of the cram circuitry, you introduced that concept in Vegas at the Live Ultimate Weight Loss Conference, and you created quite a stir. Many people found it extremely helpful. I think everybody did, but a lot of people are saying now, well, you know, there's nothing I can do about it. I've got this circuitry.
Right.
So, yeah. What do you say to that,
yes.
To those people?
Let's what this is it's just a little deeper insight, actually, and I think an important additional insight into why this whole problem has been so difficult. So we've all known about the pleasure trap for a long time, which is just the taste sensitivity issue, that if you eat healthy foods, your taste buds will become more sensitive and you'll be far more welcoming and accepting of healthy food. And the more rich food that we eat and the more processed food that we eat, the less and less we like natural food. That's the basic trap that is set. However, now it looks like there's going to be a second problem here. And it's a problem that you and I have observed for years in the healthy world. And that is people that are doing McDougall style or True North style. They're people that are actually eating very healthfully. But some people are clearly systematically overeating. So they're still eating too much, and they may be 30 or 40 pounds overweight, and they're very puzzled. And so we've had a lot of people that may switch to a healthier diet, and they might lose 50 or 60 pounds, and then they stop. And there they sit 30 or 40 pounds over their ideal weight, and they're puzzled. And you and I have thought, well, I have thought for years that really the issue then was just that the food was still a little bit too rich. And so that's the discussion that you and I had many years ago. So you were eating healthy foods, AJ, but you were eating foods you were eating too many foods that were too rich. And so as we moved you from a richer diet to a more unprocessed True North diet, we saw the weight come off. And so it all works according to plan. And it all worked out great. And it does for many people just that way. But what has puzzled us, for a long time has been the people that will swear up and down that they are eating nothing but healthy food, but they're still 30, 40 pounds overweight. And those of us that talk to each other and scratch our heads about this, Dr. Goldhammer and our friends in the industry, we have very often not totally believed people. So we have scratched around for evidence that in fact they were eating foods that were too rich. And so that's why I was convinced that you were eating too rich a food. And it turned out we're right sometimes. So Dr. Goldhammer had a patient once that was switched to a healthy diet, lost a great deal of weight, and then stopped, but he was still quite a bit overweight. And he swore up and down he was eating everything healthy. And Alan kept questioning him because he was sure there was some naughty thing in the pile. And it turned out it was juice. So the guy was drinking juice, and Alan thought, gee, that juice couldn't possibly be keeping 60 pounds on this man. You know, he's lost 60 or 80 pounds. He was way overweight. He's done fabulously well. Why is he stopping? And so Alan kept questioning him, and we hit the juice, and Alan just thought, well, the juice can't be anything. And he thought, well, how much juice are you drinking? The guy said, a gallon a day. He was drinking a gallon a day of apple juice. And so when he's knocked off the gallon a day of apple juice, he started to lose weight again. So we've had many sleuthing incidences like this that convinced us for a long time that the issue was calorie density all the way. Animal experiments, calorie density, the Penn State experiments, Barbara Rawls, volumetrics, calorie density. These are the big, that was the big thing that we believed in. Now, however, there's been our little cohort that's been jumping up and down and saying, I'm not doing anything out of line. I'm really not. And I'm still having a problem. And so we didn't know what to think about that until this idea. So this idea comes along, and the notion is that you can actually become conditioned to overeating. And specifically, the reason why this would work would be that in our natural history, we would be very excited about eating food that was particularly rich and that you would get into only on occasion. And when that rich food would be there, it would pay our ancestors to go ahead and cram it in past normal satiety. And so normal satiety is working fine virtually all the time. But once in a while, under the relatively rare conditions of rich food, you would go ahead and cram it in if it was available. Now, when you bring that into the modern world, obviously, the rich food is there all the time. And so as a result, we would be cramming all the time, which a lot of people are cramming all the time, essentially every day or every evening is very common. And so now we run into an additional problem, and that is that once you do something over and over again, then the nervous system gets ready for it and anticipates it. And so in this case, the nervous system is anticipating the fact that it's going to get a bunch of calories after dinner. And so what it will then do is it will actually kick up digestive process, getting ready for that food. And as it gets ready for that food, those digestive processes to us feel like craving. So we literally have a craving after we're already full for rich foods. So this is the conditioned cram circuit. So it's the cram circuit is natural. The conditioning is natural, but a conditioned cram circuit is not natural. You have to have a bizarre set of circumstances where there's rich food around every day that's available. And then you could wind up with a conditioned cram circuit. So people that may have heard this may have rung true for them, and they might have said, well, now what am I supposed to do about this? Well, the issue is that this is exactly the same process as it comes to getting rid of any conditioned process, which is what we call extinction. And so if you're going to ever quit cigarettes, we can talk till the cows come home about all the tricks that we're going to do. But the truth is, it's pretty simple. You have to stop doing it. And the first day is very hard, and the second day is very hard, and the third day is very hard, and the fourth day is very hard. And through all of those days, your nervous system is going to be throwing a fit because essentially it's used to the dopamine hit that comes with the nicotine. And if you don't give it to it, it's going to scramble around looking for that reward, and it's going to put out a lot of energy trying to get it. this is exactly how an animal would be designed. So if you have a cat that comes by your back sliding door and it belongs with the neighbors, but it finds out that you have some rich food and you decide to feed it to be sweet, well, you can count on it coming the next day. And then you can count on it coming the next day after that. And so it's going to start craving that food, and that craving is going to remind it that you're going to be there to feed it. And if you don't feed it, it's going to throw a fit. And then it's going to come back tomorrow and it's going to throw another fit. And then it's going to throw a fit the day after that. And then finally, it will quit throwing a fit. So essentially what will happen is the mind of whether it's that cat or you runs a cost-benefit analysis on whether this is worth the trouble, about whether it's starting to look like we're not going to get the reward. So it's not worth hopping the guy's fence and then going over there and screaming at the top of our lungs. And the same thing is true of your mind. Your mind will quit screaming at you and insisting that it wants to get that treat if you quit giving it to it every night. It will quiet down, and then you will not have the digestive system act up, so you won't have those feelings of craving because you will have counter-conditioned the circuit. So that's the solution to the problem. And people will roll their eyes and say, well, that doesn't sound very easy and elegant. Well, it's not easy or elegant getting off alcohol. It's not easy or elegant even getting off coffee. So it's not easy or elegant getting off of a conditioned cram circuit, but it can absolutely be done. What it takes is a little determination and some resolution, and then you just do it. And we don't fiddle around, we don't pussyfoot around, and we don't whine about it. We just do it. And once you do it, of course, what happens is within a week or two, it's way easier. So once you get through the little fit that your nervous system throws, then pretty soon your nervous system starts to not expect it, and pretty soon it quiets down. So you can imagine running a business where fairly often if people squawked, you gave raises. Can you imagine what happens the day when you say no more raises? Oh boy, you can expect the yelling to get even louder. Well, wait a second, I didn't ask for one last week, but everybody else got one, so I would have asked last week for one. I would ask, but I didn't. I thought I was being good, so now you should give it to me now. It's like, no. Okay, so you're going to have a little riot on your hands for a little while until everybody finds out, oh, no more raises. And then they're just going to settle down. So this is the nature of nature, and we can command your nervous system to settle down, but we have to be resolute about it.
Yeah. This is fascinating. And what you're saying, doesn't that just bring home the point that you've always said, how you have to work harder on your environment than you do ourselves? And the number one rule of healthy eating is no junk food in the house, because if there's nothing rich in your environment, you can't cram on rich food. You might be able to cram on carrots and broccoli and apples, but is that even cramming? And do people even cram on those less rich foods?
Essentially, almost nobody. So I would say the only people that would cram on really healthy, relatively low density foods that's probably 1 in 1,000.
Wow.
And so those people exist, but they're extremely rare. And they're not the people that we're talking to almost every day.
Absolutely.
So we have to go not only away from rich junk food, which is the pleasure trap, but we have to go away from rich healthy food.
Sure.
Really the cram trap.
Right. And like Ezekiel bread and peanut butter, things like that.
Bread and peanut butter. I can't tell you in the last 3 or 4 months where I've been talking to clients on phone consults about this, that how many times I used that as an example, and how many times people said, how did you know what was in my refrigerator?
That's hilarious. That's why I tell people their environment's the number one predictor of their success. If it's in your house, it's in your mouth. It's not a question of if you will eat it, just when. Dr. Lisle, a really interesting question from Christina just popped up on the feed. And by the way, guys, thank you so much for watching. And while you're watching, why not hit the share button so more people can glean Dr. Lisle's wisdom, and maybe he'll consider even doing this a weekly feature if we get enough people to watch. So Christina says, she says, does the cram circuit show up more for women, given significant hormonal changes before and during menstruation? I notice this is the only time during the month that I have several cravings or severe cravings. Can it be that menstruation is a trigger for the cram circuit? And a lot of the women on this broadcast are saying they feel the same way.
I doubt it. So let me tell you, though, what they're observing. Your monthly cycle could be conditioning something. Okay, so you could be conditioned. We actually know, for example, that cravings for chocolate are higher during the menstrual cycle than at any other time, which is very interesting. So it's very possible that you've gotten into routines around your period where you have some conditioning processes going on. The cram circuit per se being something that would be conditioned then, it's possible, but I don't think that particularly makes any necessary theoretical sense. I'm not saying it couldn't be true. I'm just saying it's more likely that specific types of foods, a specific pattern that you get into around that time of the month, you could easily then wind up with cravings. So I don't think it's cravings just in general for cramming. I think it might be cravings for specific foods that you've got a little habit pattern built up, and then it's made the link between that time of the month and that treat. So I think that's very possible.
Wow, that's cool. So cramming and binging aren't the same thing, though, necessarily, right? I mean,
that's a good question. I would say that the following is true. The cramming is something that I would call that junior varsity binging. So in other words, cramming is something that you're going to see is totally normal. So it's a completely normal instinct. And it's going to happen routinely if you put people in the situation where there's rich foods around. So they may eat healthy food, they get full, then they go ahead and cram. So that there's really nothing about this that looks at all pathological. It starts to look pathological under certain conditions. Like, for example, it's happening every day because unlike our Stone Age ancestors, we don't have rich food once a month. We've got it every single day. It's in the kitchen. So now we're indulging this circuit, which is there for your survival. And now we set up a conditioning paradigm. So now we've set up a conditioned cram circuit, so we're expecting and craving it. So that, I think, AJ, that is unbelievably common. I would hazard to say I wouldn't be surprised if 80% of the United States has a conditioned cram circuit. Now, binging is not something that 80% of people do. Mm-hmm. So binging is a little more ragged. So a lot of times what will set up binging is people will be much more conscious in trying to control their food. And so they may get themselves hungry, and they're actually trying to do some smart things. So they're trying to restrict their calories. They're trying to lose weight. They're trying to behave themselves, etc. And then very often what happens with that strategy is they get ravenously hungry. So they may go quite a number of hours without eating. And then what happens then is that they then will eat. Then they're going to be driven to eat, and they're driven to eat really rich foods. So then binging looks a little different in that most of the people that are binging are not starting out with a bunch of healthy food, and then afterwards, then they start eating dessert, and then they eat a whole tray full of Chips Ahoy cookies. No, that's a standard cram. A binge is more like, I'm trying not to eat, I'm trying not to eat, I'm trying not to eat, I'm trying not to eat. And then when I do eat, I eat rich food and I eat a tremendous amount of it. Mm-hmm. So it's clearly the same type of circuitry, and they are very close cousins, but the binging has underneath it a more turbulent process that's going on. And usually binges are, instead of binging on, 800 calories worth of potatoes and rice and beans and corn and steamed vegetables and a salad, i.e. a nice big healthy dinner, and then eating a bunch more. Usually a binger starts out with something that's rich at the beginning. So they start out with a cheeseburger and a chocolate shake and ice cream and French fries, and then they go to a liquor store and they get a big 3 bags of Doritos, and everything that they're eating is highly concentrated. And so what I believe happens is that they get conditioned to doing this. So they probably, if we were to look at a binger's digestive system, my guess is that they are probably churning out a great deal of bile in order to break down a high-fat tornado that is about to hit them. And so probably if we looked at that process as the binge is starting, or as it is beginning to start, we're probably going to find a very antsy person that has a lot of digestive enzymes, an awful lot of digestive reflexes taking place, because it's expecting to get hit with 5 or 6 or 7,000 calories. And as a result, they crave it. Okay. And then once it starts, as you begin to eat the first rich thing, it reinforces. And now the system basically says, okay, this is for real. It's going to happen again. And so it braces itself for the storm, and it creates its own craving that can be pretty intense. So I think binging is clearly a more pathological, if you were, process. I would say that the two things are not dissimilar, maybe to the difference between being addicted to coffee and being addicted to cigarettes. So coffee is, not a trivial addiction. It's relatively mild. It's not that destructive. You could just put this little hook in your mouth. Okay. And it's not great, but it's not super intense. Whereas cigarettes are much more intense and much more problematic. But they are not dissimilar in their intensity, but one of them is clearly more intense than the other and more difficult. And that is how I would see the difference between a conditioned cram circuit and binge eating.
So I want to repeat back to you briefly what you said to make sure that I understand it, because Amanda says that you described her to a T. She eats healthy food all day till full, and then gives into cravings at night, like chip and ice cream. So that's the cram circuit. And if she didn't, and that's normal, you're saying that we all have this conditioned cram circle. That's not pathological. She doesn't need to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist because of this. And however, I would add that if she didn't have ice cream and chips in her house, she would not be able to cram on it. But binging, if I understand you, is a little bit more pathological, even though it may be creating its own circuitry, and that it is from restricting, either somebody restricting calories or particularly calories from starch. Is that correct? Because it seems to me that at least the people I know that are suffering from binging, they're not only restricting calories, but it seems to be they're particularly restricting starch, which to me is the only thing that's ever going to make you feel full and satisfied.
I think there's a lot to that. I think that there are individuals where there are individuals that get a conditioning system loaded up that they can binge on anything. So they're not typical, but there are people that can binge on very healthy food, and it can be something to see. So there's people that can eat 8 pounds of baked potatoes.
Wow.
That is an extraordinary situation, and only takes place behind essentially a conditioned binging. Really serious conditioned cramming is kind of what this is. So I see these things on essentially a continuum, and whoever Amanda is, that's a very standard, healthy, normal nervous system that has itself wandering into a pathological kitchen.
That's right. So it's not. I love that, Dr. Lisle. So it's not her circuitry that's pathological, it's her kitchen. That's fantastic. Again, the environment. And guys, don't forget to share this so that hopefully Dr. Lisle will come back. So these people that can binge on these 8 pounds of potatoes, I can't help them. Can they come to you for private sessions? Because I know that you have a website, which is www.esteemdynamics.org, and you put aside, I believe, 12 slots a week to do private sessions. They can procure one and schedule it on your website. Is this something that you could help? Because I know that I can't even relate to 8 pounds of, I eat 3 pounds of potatoes a day. I call that dinner and lunch, but I can't imagine 8 pounds.
Yes. Yeah, this is the kind of thing that I can sometimes be helpful. I mean, this is tricky business, and just like in the same way that sometimes I'm helpful to help somebody stop smoking, but there's only so much that we can say and so much we can plan, and at the end of the day, sooner or later, somebody has to face this thing down and look it in the eye and say, I'm going to go ahead and be uncomfortable in waves for the next week or so. So I'm going to have several waves where my nervous system is going to be screaming to indulge, to get rid of these cravings. And I'm going to have to just look it in the eye and not do it. One of the things that I did when I was about when I turned 50, I'd always been interested in itching. I don't know why.
God, now you said that.
Struck me as a little bit interesting. The fact that it has a contagious quality to it, if people even talk about it, told me that this is part of our natural history, that if you saw somebody itching or talking about feeling itchy, then you better start scratching yourself, because there may be a set of ticks right around where we happen to be sitting. So you need to, it increases the probability that if I'm itching, then you've actually got some little parasite. So this is, I believe, why this is a contagious sort of process. And now I've got itching on my forehead.
And now the minute you said that, my face started itching. That's
sorry about
hilarious.
that. But
Hey, so
as you can now see, even though it seems very odd that I would be interested, now you're starting to see that it's actually quite interesting. And so one day I decided that I was going to not scratch an itch. And I tried to do that and I failed, and then I failed again, and then I failed again, and then I failed about 30 times at this. And then one day I had it out with myself and I said, what are you going to be 80 years old before you actually try to face this thing down? Like, you should just try to face this thing down. Let's just find out what's at the other end. Because I'm looking right at my arm or whatever it was, and knowing full well that there was no flea biting me. I could see it, that there was nothing wrong with that skin, that I knew that all this was a little rogue circuit going off. So I stared at this thing, and I did something that I hadn't done before, which is what I took off my watch. And I looked at my watch and I said, I'm going to time how long this is going to take, and I'm just going to stare at this watch, and we're just going to see. Now, it took 2 minutes, and that was an extremely long 2 minutes. Obviously, I had failed many times, but for some reason, by timing it, it made it more endurable. And so I stared at this thing, and it went away. And then subsequently, I've done it many times since. And it always winds up being between a minute or two, is when essentially a rogue circuit that's going off for no good reason settles down and you don't have the itch. I always wondered, would you always then walk around and always want to itch that thing, or would it ever go away? And the answer is, I knew that it had to. I had no idea when. I thought it might be half an hour. Who would know? So in the same way, it's useful to know that these waves of craving are not going to last forever. They will come and they will go. And the itch feels like you should and must itch this thing. And it feels like it's not going to go away if you don't itch it. But it turns out that is incorrect. It will go away if you don't itch it. Yeah. And you just have to, obviously it was in our best interest in our natural history to go ahead and scratch, even if you couldn't see anything there, because if there's a 3% chance that some mosquito was biting you, then you should go ahead and try to kill it. And even if that means you got a bunch of scratches on your body where there was nothing there, that was worth it. It was more worth it to scratch and maybe get some little parasite than to not scratch and not get it. In the same way with obeying a conditioned cram circuit, it was always in our best interest to go ahead and cram in some rich food if it's available. Mm-hmm. Even if you're not hungry, even if you're overweight, even if there's been nothing but other than a constant food supply for the last 6 months, it doesn't matter. The natural history of our species said there might not be very much food in the next 60 days, so go ahead and load up while we've got it. So that circuit is in there, and that circuit will rise up and create a wave of craving. But folks, that wave of craving will not last. It will pass just like the itch. And so it might pass in 15 minutes. It might pass in half an hour. It may be mild. It may rise and get a little bit more intense, but it's really not that intense. And so once we break its back by actually facing this down for several days in a row, it quiets down and you have what everybody would say is a new habit. But when we talk about habits, people don't even know what that is. Well, we know a great deal of what habits are formed on, and they're formed on classical conditioning, just like we're talking about in this. The system anticipates certain rewards, and then we go obey it and go get those rewards. And if we don't get them, the system throws a fit. So if you're going to change a habit, you have to go through the process of having the system throw a fit. You have to face it down. You have to grit your teeth and stare at your watch and realize it's going to pass. Now, a binge eater that I worked with, I was getting very confident, very confident that I could manage this problem. And I said, listen, these waves of craving are going to last maybe half an hour to an hour. So don't sweat it and don't worry about it. Just realize that that's what it's going to be. Go for a walk, go bowling, whatever it is. And I said, but it's going to be, they'll come in waves and might be as much as an hour, which makes sense to me about the, other people had reported similar things, sometimes much less. She came back the next week and said, Dr. Lisle, 3 hours.
Should have gone to a movie.
Wasn't very happy with me. 3 hours. It's like, okay, I didn't know that you could have cravings that would go on for 3 hours. Obviously, a deeply conditioned circuit in that individual. But nevertheless, she broke the back of it. So this is very possible to do. So just because this is a tricky trap, and those of you that heard me in Las Vegas, just because we know how tenacious this trap is, that this thing will not just go away without a fight. You can win this fight. Everybody can win this fight, just as everybody that is now smoking cigarettes can get off of cigarettes. Okay. I would say that people that are addicted to very powerful drugs, that may not be possible. In other words, you're starting to reach out to the limits of human willpower. The hard drugs don't play fair at all. They create a wall so high that many people, no matter how motivated they are, they cannot scale the wall. That's what makes them the incredible, dangerous things that they are. But cigarettes, no. Cigarettes are within the capability of the average human being, and almost all human beings, to grit your teeth and suffer through the squalling that your nervous system is going to do. And the same thing is true with this. This is one whole notch, one whole class lower in difficulty than cigarettes in terms of the sheer physiological cravings. It's just tenacious, okay? And that's why, as AJ is saying, if the stuff is in your environment, those cues and knowing that the environment is going to trigger cravings, because your nervous system is going to imagine that it's there, and it's going to see it in its mind's eye, and it's going to know all it has to do is walk over there and open the freezer door, and it can start to imagine what it's going to taste like. And all of that will keep this being reinforced. And every time you reinforce it, you strengthen the association and make the fight a little bit harder.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that. Before we go on, I just want to share a few of the comments with you. People are loving that you're here. They want you to come back. Everybody's been itching since you talked about the itch circuitry. Jennifer wants to know if that's your original artwork. And Jenny wants to know if you'll ever auction that painting off, because apparently a lot of people think it's beautiful. I live in by a park, and there's a lot of stray cats in the neighborhood. And so sometimes people feed them. And our landlord has written a letter saying we're not allowed to do that, or we could be evicted. And so when people stop feeding them, for a few days, they would still come by and meow and meow and meow. But like you said, after about 3 days, they stop coming by. So kind of that's what I think about these cravings. When you give into them, people think if they give into the craving, they make the craving go away. No, they're intensifying it. And the only way for it to ever go away permanently would be to stop giving into it, as hard as that may be.
Yes. of course, as I'm sure you understand this, and we all do, and that is when you give into the craving, it eliminates the craving for right then. Of course it does. And there's a beautiful relief when that takes place. And so but that's the problem. Now we've reinforced it. And so that's, believe me, that cat is all happy and purring and all relaxed, and just nothing's better than when you open that can and put it down in front of it. But now you've made sure that thing's coming back tomorrow, and it's determined, it is sure then that, when you are not giving it the can, that you've got one and it deserves it. And if it yells long and loud enough, it's going to get it, which is exactly what happens as we reinforce our own bad habits. Right.
Because you've often said that we're just a bunch of raccoons in the garbage. And if we want to stop that, then throw out the garbage. Right. So that's just absolutely fascinating. Now, Christina said that your intervention for anxiety, which is to run or march in place, she said, would that also interrupt the cram circuit? I would think any distraction might help.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think going and exercising definitely would. I've noticed something in myself. If I have something troubling me that's hanging over my head, something that I was supposed to do and didn't, and AJ's upset with me. I noticed that when I go, what I do for recreation is I go play basketball, and I noticed that when I go play basketball, I'm in the game, and I'm playing for a couple hours, and I come out of there, and I literally haven't thought about anything in the rest of my life for the 2 hours I'm in that gym. Like everything, all I'm thinking about is the guys that are there and the teams, and who called the chintzy foul on me and all that. That's all that I'm concerned about. And it's not until I get outside the gym door, walk into my car, do I start to then, my brain shifts gear and starts thinking about all the things that I was supposed to be doing. And so this is very interesting that human beings are what we're going to call context dependent. They are very context dependent. What's going on in your mind? I think we can get overly fascinated with the fact that human beings have these incredible imaginations, and that you can take yourself out to Star Trek just in your own mind's eye and sit there and see Captain Kirk and Vulcan and everything else under the sun. Of course you can. But the truth of the matter is that we are very sensory oriented, that we are highly subject to the real life sensory inputs that are right in front of our face. And those things start dominating the mental machinery. So when I'm out there playing basketball and I'm upset about something, I could have had something wonderful happen to me, half an hour before I went out on the court. And then 45 minutes into the game on the court, somebody does something and I get arguing with them, and now I'm all bent out of shape. It's like, really? I've completely forgotten that something terrific just happened an hour before. And so this is the context dependence of human nature, and actually all animal nature. Humans are so imaginative that they can forget just how important their sensory environment is in terms of what's actually going on with them. So this is why we need to pay such close attention to our environment and do a really good job designing it for success. Because if the environment is conducive to you doing a really good job and enjoying your life from within the context of doing a good job, then you will. And if the environment is actually set up for self-indulgence and conditioning things that we don't want conditioned, they will condition. And so this is why this is a long-standing message that you and I are trying to share with people. Get your environment really clean, get your routines down. Let's make sure we've got a bunch of healthy food right under our hands. And now we know also not rich healthy food. We've got to have it, intermediate calorie density, healthy food available, and no rich food available. If we do that, then we can keep out of this trap.
Absolutely. Mimi says, we love you, Doug. And since you mentioned environment, we have two very similar questions from Julie and Jennifer. it's about their work environment, because they both say they would never dream of having any crap food in their house.
Yes.
However, that their binges start at work because maybe they're stressed, and we have a lot of people that aren't the boss. And so,
Yes.
you go to every business today, whether it's the bank or the pet store, and there's free samples of candy. So they're saying, what do you do about the work environment? Their home is clean. There's no processed food or junk, but if sometimes they give in to the crap in the work environment, which then starts the binge earlier in the day. And how do you help these people?
A couple of things. It's very interesting. These are, the good news is that you're going to be able to watch these patterns over and over again and really learn the potency of it. So, small confession. Sometime in the last 3 weeks, I went to a Japanese restaurant, had a really healthy meal. And at the end, they bring a little mint, a little chocolate mint. So I ate it. And I have to tell you, it was entertaining watching my brain as I drove home. My brain was scheming about where it is that I could go and get some more chocolate thing. And I'm like, that is incredible, because I am not at all, that no way is that a habit. I don't think about it, etc. This is not something that goes down. And yet here it was, this taste is lingering in the nervous system. It was so reinforcing, obviously, because my meal's a bunch of, vegetables in a big soup. Okay. So meal's all healthy and fine. And it's all 300, 200 calorie pound vegetables. And, so there we go. And now what do we have? 3,000 calorie pound chocolate on my tongue, a little bit of it. And what happens? Scheming. And this was interesting. And of course, then I watched it, and I watched the decay function on it for my own entertainment. And within about 10 or 15 minutes, it was completely gone. So it fired up a bunch of circuits. The little raccoon was trying to figure out where there would be a box of those mints. And then it wasn't going to do anything about it. And so then by the time I got home and got distracted and petted the cats, fed the neighbor's cat that comes by. No, I didn't. But the point is that once I got distracted, got out of that stimulus situation, then it all quiets down.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So in the same way, I told a friend recently that was having the same problem at her work. And she says, it's this time of year, she's the Jewish faith. And so this is a time of year, there's a bunch of really tasty foods around. And I said, and she says, and it's free. And I said, free cocaine. Okay. It's very interesting. By recognizing, by saying, look, this is cocaine. This is standing right between you and your weight loss goals and your fitness goals, etc. And so, just because it's free and it's hanging around work and it's free samples, you need to understand, no, that's free cocaine. And as soon as I said that, her reaction was, it's disgusting. Like she had to conceptualize it in a different way. Mm-hmm. So suddenly it wasn't so friendly, and suddenly it was, not that there's evil people scheming, but close enough. I'm saying close enough. Essentially, mm-hmm. the modern food supply is essentially an evil scheme to have you 50 pounds overweight and feeling bad about yourself. It's like, hey, I don't care how friendly it looks. Nice free samples, forget it. It's free cocaine. Don't get hooked.
Yeah. Well, there is a cost to free, isn't there? Your experience with the chocolate mint reminded me of something that maybe will help these two young ladies with unclean work environments. There was a brief period of time in my 50-pound weight loss where I was still a pastry chef, and I didn't want to be doing that. I knew I would have to quit eventually. And so I wouldn't eat the food, but every now and then I would, just to make sure, I'd have to taste it.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want that lingering chocolate or mint or whatever on my tongue. So I had a bunch of steamed kale. And every time I had to taste a batter, I would put in a piece of plain steamed kale because I wanted that to be the last taste. So maybe if
that's something.
Yeah. So maybe if they had a lot of healthy food there, when they see the chocolate, just eat something that's not chocolate and let that be what you remember last.
Yes. You know, I will. I don't want to sound sanctimonious or pure because I make plenty of mistakes, but I have to tell you that I think my favorite personal taste in the world is a ripe, cool watermelon. And there really isn't anything, you know, there is no junk food of any concoction. Of course, it has a different experience that will blow that away in terms of calorie density, and it will reach in and artificially hammer the pleasure centers of the brain. So that little piece of chocolate mint, you know, was quite a little snort of cocaine is what it was. But there is really no experience that is so integrated and so good for me as that piece of watermelon, because it's wet and it's fibrous and it's crunchy and it's sweet, but it's not overly sweet, and it, you know, and it's healthy, and I know it's healthy, and everything is within the normal parameters of how it should be. It's effectively like listening to really great music at the right volume level, and whereas anything else is listening to something that's overly loud. And I mean, it can be racy and it can be exciting when it's overly loud. Of course it is. But it's a different experience, but there's something just beautiful about treating this nervous system, you know, in the right way with the right stuff. And so that's what we need to keep focused on. We are not deprived when we say no to the cocaine. We are limiting our life experience. We're drawing boundary lines around it. And, you know, some people may have extraordinarily difficulty with that concept. But the truth of the matter is that when you limit your adventurousness to healthy living, then you expand the possibility of not only the length of your life, but the quality of it. So it is a trade-off. You know, I mean, the lure is there, and we all understand the tremendous lure of the artificially rich food, and even the healthy rich food on a repetitive basis. We understand it, but folks, it's costly, and it's costly in these very subtle long-term ways that it's like a little debt that is building up, and it's pricey. So yeah, nothing like that watermelon. In fact, I'm going to go right after this and go get myself water.
Now you're going to have everybody on this broadcast itching and eating watermelon by the end of the broadcast. Yeah. That's hilarious. So Gabriella has an interesting question, because in Vegas, you said that a full stomach was actually a cue for us to cram. So her question was, well, then should we be eating smaller meals so that we don't experience a full stomach?
Very good question. I would say no. And here's why. So that's very good thinking on Gabriella's part. And so this is that, but here's what it is that I'm after. I'm not afraid of you eating to satiety. Not at all. What we have to do, this would be similar to saying, I smoke cigarettes out on my back deck after dinner. Okay. And so what we would say is, well, for a while, you may want to switch up and not go out to your back deck after dinner. So we're going to try to break that conditioning paradigm apart. But what we're not going to say is, you don't get to go sit out on your back deck. Nothing wrong with sitting out on your back deck. And pretty soon, after a while, you can sit out on the back deck and not be craving the cigarettes. And in the same way, there's nothing wrong with eating to satiety on whole natural foods, but we have to get out of the conditioned process that means that it's a biological signal that we're going to cram. By the time you do not cram 5, 6, 7 days in a row after you've eaten to satiety, then eating to satiety will start to not be a cue for the cramming. And so now we counter condition that. And yeah, the last thing I want people to do is to be obsessive and worried about, have they eaten too much? Could they still eat a little more? Have they eaten to satiety? It's like, no, I don't care. Just get it halfway right. We know when it's wrong. All of us know when we are not hungry, we're actually full and our stomach's distended, but we're cramming a peanut butter sandwich in there anyway. That's the cram circuit. That's the one that we stop. And if we do that repetitively and consistently, then we basically break up the conditioning. So great question. And so it's I'm glad she asked, because it's an important one that we answer that. We're not saying don't eat to comfortable satiety.
Right. Good. Yeah. I'm glad we brought that up and that you answered that. And I think that's a great analogy about how the junk food and the rich food is like, like rap music, and the watermelon is kind of like smooth jazz. And I would much rather, the rap concert can be exciting, but I kind of prefer this, at least now with my age. So Tracy says, what's the quickest way to recover mentally from a binge and get back on track? That, we hear that a lot, because it seems like once you do it, then you keep doing it. And that's why, when people relapse, I feel so bad, because they could do well for days, weeks, months, and then they can get hit with this. And then sometimes it takes them just as long to get back on track as they were compliant. And I know that's a real issue for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think binging is, I think that what's useful for binge eaters is to understand that there's nothing pathological about them, that what they're living in is they're living in a pathological environment, and they've got themselves neuroadapted to rich foods, and they also have a cram circuit, which is completely reasonable that they have one. But the problem is that, ironically, a lot of your binge eaters are actually more intensively conscientious than just a normal run-of-the-mill crammer. Okay. In other words, because a lot of what sets up binge eating is restriction. And so these people will restrict because they're embarrassed and humiliated and disgusted with themselves because they binged yesterday. And so now they're like, I don't need to eat. I was bad, so now I'm not going to eat. Well, now they grit their teeth and they wind up, 4 p.m, they haven't eaten anything all day, and now they're in trouble again. And so if anything, we need some more cutting ourselves a little more slack about this, and to understand that, hey, this is just a combination of adaptive instincts essentially playing out inside of a pathological environment, where some people happen to be more susceptible than others for very interesting reasons, none of which are pathological. The fact that some people are more determined to grit their teeth and not eat for 16 hours or 12 hours after they've binged, that isn't a pathological psychological problem. That's a heroic determination to slap themselves on the back of the head and say, why did you do that yesterday? We're going to make up for it today. That's not a psychological problem to fix. It's actually a characteristic that is walking us into the problem again. So it's almost essentially greater self-understanding and appreciation for how these things fit together, how these pieces fit together, can hopefully make a binge eater less critical of themselves for this process. And so we try to begin the next day by saying, let's eat modestly but comfortably, during this day. And we're not going to, quote, lose all the weight today that we gained yesterday. Forget it. We're not going to do that. We're going to begin today with a much more important agenda, which is to unwind this pattern by not being so self-critical, by being more consistent with the amount that we eat, and knowing that once you start to hit anything that remotely resembles a reasonable amount of food, you've got a conditioned cram circuit that wants to run away with you. Okay? That's why I tell people, eat a reasonable amount of food, for example, in the evening, and then you get up from that kitchen table and you do not come back. You are not back in the kitchen. You're not back in the kitchen fixing tea. You're not back in the kitchen with just a handful of nuts. You're not back in the kitchen for a carrot. You're not back in the kitchen for anything. Okay? We're not in the kitchen looking to put anything into your mouth. You drink water. The reason why is that what about this little low-cal thing? What about that little? What about an apple? Nothing. Okay, nothing. The answer is we want your nervous system to not be thinking that there is food coming after we're full. That is how we're going to counter condition this thing. because even if we put an apple in there an hour later, we're not really that hungry, but we want a little something. We're feeling a little bit of a craving for something, and we're going to be a good person. Instead of having a tray full of, I don't know, some chocolate yummy rich thing that we used to have that we threw out yesterday, we're going to have an apple instead. Don't have anything. Stare down the itch. Counter this cram circuit, and in a relatively short order, we'll have this thing under control.
I find sometimes just going for a walk after dinner. I have a dog, and Charles and I often take a walk after dinner. But now I'm thinking, last night when I got home, I actually ate a half an apple. I wasn't hungry. Why didn't you call me? I mean, I really did. It's not going to hurt me, but I think I still do it unconsciously. It was like, yeah, I kind of want a little something. But at least in my house, that's the worst that's going to happen is an apple or maybe a sweet potato. So I don't worry about it.
I'm never worried about that. I'm never worried about a normal conditioned nervous system that is not in a conditioning paradigm nibbling at a pear after dinner sometime. But I am worried about it when we're trying to break up a conditioning paradigm.
Right. I understand.
That's where I'm worried about. So this is where we want to slam on the brakes and not scratch that itch. Yeah. And that's how we're going to get out of the trap. Because
it seems to become a cycle for a lot of people. Binge, restrict, repeat. Yes. And that's, no and we've got to break that cycle. Wow. Okay. This has just been amazing. I know you wanted to keep it to no more than an hour. I want to respect your time, but to tell you that a lot of people were watching and they're sharing it. Thank you for sharing. And hopefully maybe you'll talk to us again about this or other subjects, because lots more questions. We love hearing from you. People love you. And this topic is really important. So thank you so much, Dr. Lisle. And thanks everyone for watching. You can still share this right now with all the people on your group Facebook pages and friend Facebook pages. We really appreciate that. And maybe we can encourage Dr. Lisle to maybe do this as a monthly feature, as busy as he is with the McDougall webinars once a month on Thursday and his weekly podcast. We love talking to you. So thank you, Dr. Lisle. And thanks thanks everybody for watching, and come back tomorrow at 4:00 for Weight Loss Wednesday. And we had Josh Lajani. We had some big heavy hitters watching this. So thanks so much. Thanks, Dr. Lisle. I'm Chef AJ, and I make healthy taste delicious. Thanks, y'all.